Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular meeting of the DeKalb City Council, May 11, 2020. Prior to our roll call this evening and call to order, I would like to remind anyone in the audience who would like to speak to any item on the agenda, or for that matter, any item not on the agenda, to kindly fill out a speaker request form and get it to me. Our city clerk, Lynn Fazekas, is not with us tonight. She is with us, but she's not in the room. She is meeting remotely. And so if you get those to me immediately, I will get you on at the appropriate time. We'd also like to ask anyone who is speaking tonight to try to keep your comments to about 3 minutes or less, because we have quite a few letters to read, and I think we also have a few folks in the audience who would like to speak. So with that being said, I would like to ask our city clerk, Lynn Fazekas, to call the roll, please.
Morris.
Here.
Felucca.
Here.
Schmitt.
Here.
Perkins.
Here.
Mcadden.
Here.
Verbic.
Here.
Favor.
Here.
Mayor Schmitt.
Here.
8 present.
Thank you. I'd like to remind those who are watching at home on TV that the only person other than our city clerk, Lynn Fazekas, who is not with us tonight is Alderman Smith from our 3rd Ward. He is with us, but he will be calling in remotely. So if you to please join me in rising for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And for the benefit of those just joining us, it is very uncomfortable for me to try to read some of the letters and go through the agenda wearing a mask, and so I have asked our 2 aldermen who are closest to me, beyond the 6 feet required, but I've asked them if it's okay if I do remove my mask, and both Alderman Perkins and Alderman Mccadden have said that would be fine. So, having said that, our first item on the agenda, item C, is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Favor, seconded by Alderman Mcadams. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Morris.
Yes.
Felucca.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Perkins.
Yes.
Unknown participant is now joining.
I'm sorry, there was some interference. Alderman Perkins.
Yes.
Mcadden.
Yes.
Verbic.
Yes.
Favor.
Yes.
Mayor Schmitt.
Yes.
8 ayes.
Thank you. The agenda is approved as presented. Now to public participation, and I have 2 letters to read under public participation. No one in the audience, I believe, has indicated a desire to speak until such time that we get to their item on the agenda. So the first letter is from Derek Van Buer in DeKalb, and Derek writes thusly: while watching the video of Scott Mcadams at Tri-State Towing and comparing it to his statements to the police, The events described by Scott Mcadams initially are not what is shown on the video. In the first interview with the police, Scott Mcadams provided the police with the following information. He called Tri-State Towing and confirmed that they had towed his car. Mcadams told me that he drove with his girlfriend to their office to get the car and complain. He mentioned that when talking to them, he dropped his City of Alderman ID when producing his driver's license. He said they released his car without any fees, and he left. The video shows Scott Mcadams taking out his Alderman ID from his wallet, reaching through the window, and placing his ID on the counter. Scott Mcadams then goes back to his wallet, takes out his driver's ID, and places it against the window. Scott Mcadams did not accurately describe the events to the police. Why? Scott Mcadams used his public office in a personal dispute. This type of behavior is wrong. Furthermore, Scott Mcadams was inaccurate with the events to the police. Public officials should only use their offices for the public good and not in their self-interests. Signed, Derek Van Buer. Our next letter is from Adam Woolridge, Aurora, Illinois. Mayor Jerry, mayors around the state are ignoring the governor's illegal order in reopening their communities. Families in DeKalb are hurting. They want to return to work. They want to provide for their families. Adults are able to decide if the risk is greater than the reward. Businesses know how to enforce social distancing and cleaning regimens. Are you willing to put the working families of DeKalb ahead of JB's illegal order? Signed, Adam Woolridge. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to address the council at this time? If not, we'll move on to presentations. I do have two proclamations. The first one will be forwarded to the DeKalb Police Department. It's National Police Week, May 10 through 16, 2020. Jason, you're not here to receive this, are you? No. Okay, good. I, Jerry Smith, Mayor of the City of DeKalb, Illinois, in recognition of this event, do hereby proclaim the week of May 10 through 16, 2020, as National Police Week in the City of DeKalb. It's a very expressive and sincere proclamation on behalf of this City Council and on behalf of the Mayor proclaiming National Police Week, and we'll make sure that we get that to Chief and in the Police Department. Our next proclamation is, again, one that will be forwarded to Fire Chief Jeff McMaster and the Fire Department. National Emergency Medical Services Week, May 17 through 23, 2020. I, Jerry Smith, Mayor of the City of DeKalb, Illinois, in recognition of this event, do hereby proclaim the week of May 17 through 23, 2020 as Emergency Medical Services Week in the City of DeKalb. And again, the proclamation is very colorful, very expressive, very sincere, and we'll make sure that we get that over to our brave men and women in the Fire Department. There are no appointments this evening. We'll now go to item G on the agenda, and that is the consent agenda. All items are enacted by one motion on the consent agenda unless a member of the City Council would like to remove an item from the consent agenda. Do I see anyone who would like to do that? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, which it comprises of four items tonight. Minutes of the regular City Council meeting of April 27, 2020. Number 2, accounts payable and payroll through May 11, 2020 in the amount of $2,188,285.65. Number 3, FY 2020 Human Services Funding First Quarter Report. And number 4, Hospitality Recovery Program Update.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Felucca and seconded by Alderman Perkins that we approve that consent agenda as read. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Felucca.
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
Schmitt,
Yes.
Mcadams,
Yes.
Verbic,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes.
8 ayes.
The consent agenda is approved as presented and as printed. We now move along to item H, public hearings. There are no public hearings this evening. LI, considerations. Our first consideration is the consideration of the prevailing wage standard for tax increment financing assistance to private developments. I'd ask City Manager Nicholas if he would like to make any comments now or after we have a couple of folks. Okay, our first person who is here with us tonight is Mark Gately from North Aurora, and he would like to speak on this item, please. Mark.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I have some handouts. Can I pass out to the council members, please?
Sure.
Okay. So my name is Mark Gately. I represent the Painters Union here in DeKalb. I've been an active participant of the DeKalb building trades for 23 years. And in those 23 years, we always felt, us at the building trades, at the city council, of the DeKalb and staff and everybody involved, we had a pretty good relationship through the years, at least since I've been around, which is a long time. I'm also an elected official in North Aurora. We adopted this in North Aurora and the city of Aurora. We adopted TIF district finance tax credits to prevailing wage. The reason why we felt we needed to do it in North Aurora is very simply put that we consider it technically tax revenue. Even though it's a credit, it's still revenue that's coming from the tax dollars. So we considered it. We had a long discussion at our city council meeting, and we adopted it. But I came here tonight to get rid of some of the myths that you hear about prevailing wage. The first myth that you hear constantly is that prevailing wage will up the cost of construction. The fact is, most peer-reviewed studies, over 75% of them, have concluded that the prevailing wage laws have no impact on the total public construction cost. And we listed a quote from the Republican assistant leader in the the Indiana House of Representatives. We got rid of prevailing wage, and it hasn't saved us a penny. In other words, they're building roads, they're fixing their cities, and I guess the idea was they're going to get a bunch of people from Texas to come in and work and do the work for $10 an hour. Well, that's not going to happen. There's nobody going to come in for that low of a fee to save you the money. Indiana found that out and had to triple their gas fees, their motor fuel tax. The inaccurate claim of prevailing wage favors disproportionately white unionized workers. Well, fact is that a union ups everybody's wages. And in the construction industry, it's very diverse. City of Aurora, a lot of Latinos, and a lot of them come out here and work. I would say that the thousands of building tradesmen that live and work and spend money in DeKalb, a lot of them are Latinos. African Americans, whatever the situations, if they are working, they want to do this work, they're going to have a job and they're going to continue to do the work. So that's a myth. And there's a statement from the Black Caucus. Davis-Bacon has been instrumental in bridging the wage gap for historically disadvantaged sectors of our society. In its face of decaying and social economic opportunities, this measure provides women and minorities with an important tool to achieving greater parity with their mainstream counterparts. So, it's a myth. Inaccurate claim number 3. Illinois construction employment is down 29% because of prevailing wage laws. Well, that's simply just not true. Fact is,
Illinois has fared better than states that do not have prevailing wage laws. Only about a quarter of Illinois total construction output is public works, which would be City of DeKalb. Is subject to prevailing wage laws. Employment growth in this sector has shown just 4% since 2007, while average public works construction employment is down more than 11% in states that do not have prevailing wage laws. The lack of statewide infrastructure bill has contributed to public works construction employment that is below recession levels in Illinois. We do have a public works bill now we're working on in Springfield, if they ever convene. So this document's a few years old, but it does, the story is simply this. TIF district, we consider in building trades, DeKalb building tradesmen, consider that that's tax money, and it's being used to fund your construction, some of these blighted areas or blighted spots, and they're not paying their workers anything, paying them $10 an hour to come in and doing the work. Half your TIF jobs are done non-union and making less than standard wage. That's fact. That's what they're doing here. Inaccurate claim 4. Illinois prevailing wage rates are 37% higher than the market rates. Absent repeal, Illinois could calculate rates based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Fact, Bureau of Labor Statistics data is an accurate indicator of local market rates because it does not distinguish between journey workers or apprentices, excludes fringe benefits, overrepresents residential construction work that is low-skilled sector of construction, and does not survey actual construction sites. The use of Bureau of Labor Statistics data for calculating prevailing wage rate is just a way to push a pay cut to the middle-class construction worker, which is why 51 Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives joined Democrats in 2018 to defeat an amendment that would apply this flawed methodology to federally prevailing wage Davis-Bacon determinations. So that's pretty much facts that I'd like to just present. I know there's a lot of myths out there. People think it's going to up your costs. The true fact is it does not up costs on construction projects. So I'll say that. Is there any questions from me?
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Okay, we have 2 letters that I've been asked to read on this subject. The first is from J.J. Wett of 127 Tilton Park Drive in DeKalb. Thank you for hearing my perspective on prevailing wage. As a resident and homeowner in the great city of DeKalb, I like to see my taxes used wisely and fairly, especially when it comes to using TIF dollars. A prevailing wage is defined as the hourly wage, usual benefits, and overtime paid to the majority of workers, laborers, and mechanics within a particular area. These earnings support and help the working class continue to thrive throughout our city, state, and country. A prevailing wage seeks to prevent public construction projects from destabilizing a local construction industry and to advance other priorities such as workforce development. Prevailing wage laws do not drive up the cost of construction. A study comparing 391 school projects between 91 and 2000 conducted by the University of Utah's Chair of Economics, Dr. Pete Phillips, showed no statistical cost difference between schools built with and without a prevailing wage law. Prevailing wage laws have no impact on private construction projects, but do prevent contractors from importing lower wage workers from other states to fill construction jobs intended for local residents and paid for by the taxpayers. A simple premise supports the economic benefit of the prevailing wage law. When workers are paid prevailing wages, their income enters the stream of commerce. Workers who earn a livable wage in turn spend their income in our communities at restaurants, car dealers, and other businesses. This generates income for our businesses and revenue for our cash-strapped local governments to pay for public services such as fire and libraries. By implementing a prevailing wage for our TIF dollars, we not only ensure that our residents earn a living wage, we also help build our local economy. I am 100% in support of implementing a prevailing wage standard for tax increment financing assistance to private developments. Let's make our money work for the working class. Thank you, J. Wett, Ward 2. One other comment from it's a letter. It's written on behalf of John Pappas, DeKalb, Illinois, and it is written by Jeff Lewis, who's also from DeKalb, and Jeff is a partner in Klein, Stoddard, Buck, and Lewis. Dear Mayor Smith, I'm writing on behalf of John Pappas and would like this letter provided to the City Council as it considers the proposal of certain labor unions to require that the city impose Prevailing Wage Act standards on all projects supported by city TIF funds. Our client is opposed to this request, and we believe that other developers, contractors, businesses, and property owners will hold a similar position. As your city staff will undoubtedly point out, the Prevailing Wage Act applies to public, not private construction and development projects. Since 2009, the law has been clear that the Act does not apply to private projects, even if those projects are supported by TIF funds. The express purpose of the Prevailing Wage Act is to provide certain parameters for the labor rates paid to all laborers, workers, and mechanics employed by or on behalf of any and all public bodies engaged in public works. There is an important distinction to be maintained between public works projects and private development projects. We are asking the city to recognize this distinction. It should not be the City of DeKalb's policy to extend these public works provisions to contracts that relate to private developments. It is important for the City Council and staff to keep in mind there are already substantial restrictions on the use of TIF funds, even for private development projects. For example, the funds loaned by the city under the TIF program cannot be used for many of the labor categories that would be covered by the Prevailing Wage Act. Most of a new building's construction, including carpentry, drywall, painting, electrical, plumbing, roofing, and similar trades, cannot be paid with TIF funds. If the city were to impose prevailing wage standards on its TIF projects, the result would be to create new restriction and standards that the tax increment financing laws do not require. In fact, these additional requirements would be contrary to the purpose and goals of TIF laws themselves. The Illinois legislature has an extensive explanation of the purpose and policy behind tax increment financing. We fail to see how any additional prevailing wage requirements would fulfill these purposes. TIF funding is to be used to take blighted or unproductive property and encourage private development to improve property values, job opportunities, community health and safety, and the economic viability of the city. There are certainly other ways the City of DeKalb might tackle these issues. And if the city is contracting for public works, then the Prevailing Wage Act has its appropriate place. Here, however, it is a private citizen engaged in the redevelopment, and they should remain free to do so on the terms that are most beneficial to the project as a whole. Our client has an extensive history of successful development projects in the City of DeKalb. These are the kinds of projects that improve our community, but they could not be done without the cost-effective financing available through TIF. Imposing additional costs on these projects would make them financially unworkable. Mr. Pappas is asking that the City of DeKalb avoid imposing any additional requirement on TIF projects, especially requirements like the Prevailing Wage Act that will raise costs beyond what is feasible or practical. Yours truly, Jeff L. Lewis, representing John Pappas. Okay, those are the public comments regarding this consideration, and I'd like to now turn it over to City Manager Nicholas, and then we'll have any discussion anyone would like to have.
Thank you, Mayor. For people listening in, maybe haven't been part of this comment.
No.
It's on now. On.
Now it's on.
Now?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. People don't, maybe haven't been part of this discussion over the years. So, as has been stated by both parties, prevailing wages apply to public works projects. Those are defined as public works projects by the Department of Labor. And I think one area for this conflict and different points of view is that tax increment financing in this town has not always been limited to TIF eligible projects or TIF eligible tasks and work. I think we've done a lot better in the last year, but it's important to know that even in the case of what's being proposed tonight, if the council, say, were to maintain their 25% rule or 30% rule or whatever, the part that you're investing in with TIF dollars is that part only, and the other part is privately funded through private sources, whether banking sources or private capital or whatever. So if you're looking for a distinction, I think that's where you have to make the distinction, because we have no claim then beyond the TIF eligible projects that you want to fund and that we identify more carefully now. It used to be we just said, well, here's a project, it's worth this much, here's some TIF money. And then everything was jumbled together. Where does the carpentry come in? Where does the painting come in? Where does the plumbing come in? And so forth. And we're trying to lay those out, and when it comes time for reimbursement, we're looking at the invoices from the trades that are participating in what you're funding. So if you're looking to change anything, I think you have to keep that in mind, because there are limits to what we can control and what we can't control.
Sure. Thank you, City Manager Nicholas. Any comments on this? Alderman Felucca.
More of a question, Bill. Let's take our most recently passed TIF project, the one that's nothing happening on yet. But so we, approved a certain number of dollars for that, not the purchase, but for renovation.
Right.
Is there a way for us to distinguish what those TIF dollars are going to be used for in that renovation?
Yeah. So we have to get lien waivers from contractors that are doing the work. We have to know what the trades are. We have to know what they've spent, and then we have to audit how they can't just say $2,000 for X. We have to see the labor and material costs. We have to see the breakdown as if they were writing you a bill for what they do in your house or in your business.
I'm just trying to put together the two sides of the coin here, what Mr. Pappas has indicated, how that fits into where this discussion is.
Well, let's say, let's take a big project like some of the ones he's done. Let's take Mooney's, the new project, which is just getting underway. The part that has been declared by you, TIF, or previous council by most of you, TIF eligible is the demolition, in other words, creating the bare ground, basically. It's the infrastructure, it's the demolition, it's the soft costs, which were part of what's required to get you to where we are now. We see the piles of ground material and so forth. That's what you invested in. A lot of the new construction under the law can't be TIF funded. So that's the distinction. And it's up to us to make clear what that is. I don't think in the past that's often been clear. For instance, with the Egyptian, 2.5 million out of 4, that was a number. It may or may not have. Now, in that case, I think it's all prevailing wage, and we've looked at the first $2.5 million, and that is, and I assume the rest of it is, but we're not tracking that. We don't know. We don't have any way of following that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Alderman Morris.
So would it be crazy to try to strike a healthy balance where if you have to audit and pay that much close attention to all the details of what exactly is TIF spent, if maybe we just say those funds require prevailing wage, and then the rest we respect the privacy?
That's the middle ground.
Alderman Mcadams.
Well, I'm opposed to TIF, but I would be very interested in voting for the prevailing wage provision that we're talking about, because that takes away one of my major concerns about TIF, is that it doesn't pay a prevailing wage in private situations. So that would take away one of my biggest complaints about TIF.
Now, here's an interesting twist that you'll have to consider. There are a few, and I think Mark would agree with this. Hanging of awnings is carpenter work. Could be other, depending on the size of the awning and all the rest of that, but carpenter work. But some of these small TIF facade grants that we do, replace an awning downtown. They go to they go to a shop, I won't name it, but in another nearby town, which makes very good canvas awnings that are pretty durable and can be cleaned and so forth. And it's hung by that company's employees. I doubt that they're being paid prevailing wage, but you give 50% of that cost. And that's the difference between them deciding to replace their awning or not. As we consider these things in the smaller projects, you have to determine in a small town like this whether you're going to get artisans to come this far to do the work, like that. And whether I'm for it or not, I'm just saying you may have some conflicts here. Here's another thing. So I said in the next meeting, I'm going to bring kind of a global view of how we might approach TIF spending for the next year and a half. And then on the heels of that, and frankly, I've been sitting on 2 proposals for TIF assistance to rehab a couple of downtown businesses. They're rehab work. It's not going to generate any new increment probably, but we have always identified that as one of the TIF eligible type expenses, up to 50% or whatever it happens to be. Following our protocol to this point, I asked them all to get us a couple bids for every piece that they do. I don't see one union firm in those. I have names like Incredible Builders or whatever. So what are we going to do about that? So I think the middle ground is what Carolyn said, exactly. But we're still going to have some anomalies out there. And what some other communities have done is, even with the general principle, they've set on some of these smaller projects under a certain price range, they said, well, we prefer this, and this is our preference, but there's some latitude here. I'm not saying that as a recommendation, I'm just saying we're going to have to face that at some point.
Would it be a fair assumption, City Manager Nicholas, that some of the larger TIF projects that we've had in the city have had a mix of prevailing wage
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some have been by choice, by the developer's choice, by the contractor's choice. Is there cheating? I know it's not a perfect world, but you say 95%, 99%, prevailing wage, and others have not. But if you're looking for the ground that is a middle ground where you are basically taking seriously both propositions that have been presented here tonight, it's Councilmember Morris's proposal.
So the size of the project would definitely have a determining factor.
So if you're only giving 30%,
okay.
and that's what's TIF eligible, 30% then is absolutely going to be prevailing wage under the proposition here, and the rest.
I see.
Maybe will be anyway, but you can't guarantee it unless you more generally look at all work being done in town, because you can't pick and choose here then. If you're outside the TIF parameters, all work in town has to be prevailing wage, and you don't have the authority to do that unless, I don't know.
Alderman Favor.
Yeah.
So I kind of have two points. So the first one is, obviously, the developer they can choose to start with union labor. That can be part of their TIF request when they come to us. They can bring what that expense is going to be. So it's up to the developer to choose that, correct?
Yes, they can choose that. Mm-hmm.
So many of our developers have chosen not to bring those TIF expenses to us with union labor. The second point is, you said there's auditing, so there's additional paperwork and requirements that are going to be on the developer to prove they've followed the law, they have met the requirements, correct?
They're prevailing wage sheets that have to be filled out.
So I am not in favor of this for a couple of reasons. First, the state of Illinois hasn't made it a requirement, and they're the ones that have set the guidelines for TIF. And number two, the developer can choose to use this or not. They can choose to use union labor if they choose to or not. And I don't feel it's being business friendly to require them to do something that they would choose not to do on their own.
Alderman Morris.
I guess I just want to point out, though I am very excited about the opportunity to have prevailing wage, receiving a letter from Jeff Lewis of Klein, Stoddard, Buck and Lewis for Pappas seems to communicate at the get-go the entire way that he communicated what he's saying, that this is something that could lead to a lawsuit were we to choose to enact it, because it sounded like from his letter that he was framing that this is totally arguably illegal. That's sort of what it sounded like to me, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know. Would our attorney like to speak to that?
Yes. Am I good? Yeah, okay. I think when you do each TIF deal, it comes to the board and it's a contract, and you can write that contract however the board may choose to write it. You have to live by the contracts you already have provided, and as it has been pointed out, the Illinois Department of Labor has generally decided that the TIF funds to reimburse private development have not been subject to prevailing wage. So you can come in each case and have a case-by-case analysis of the project, the scope, the cost. Is it a small project? Is it a big project? And decide from there how you wish to go. If the developer, as part of that contract, chooses to accept those TIF dollars, and in that contract he agrees to use a certain amount of prevailing wage labor, that's a contractual issue. It's not illegal in any way or effect as far as the Illinois statutes are. It's a contractual obligation between the city and this particular individual.
Gotcha. Okay, so that makes sense. So I guess what you're saying is it would be absolutely a moving forward and in the future thing, absolutely not impacting any past contracts that we've already made. Okay.
Thank you, Alderman Morris. Alderman Verbeek.
One thing I look, getting into this topic is making the most of each project. And I notice that we do have a responsible bidder ordinance with the city of DeKalb, but there is a training component to that that's missing. So I believe, with the support of council, if we could add the training component into our responsible bidder ordinance so that each project that comes about, we know that we're getting the most highly trained labor force to work on this project for the public dollar. From a standpoint of overreaching the Illinois labor rules, I don't know what authority we would have. Would we have that authority to set our own rules to fly in the face of the Illinois Labor Board?
John, you help me out if I falter, but the Department of Labor has given guidance on this. Clearly, though, they're hearing both points of view, and they kind of took a middle ground there. They said, well, for now, here's our guidance on public works, prevailing wage. On the private rehab, it's not required. They didn't preclude the possibility that you could add that. That's why we're having this conversation tonight. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had this on the agenda. So I go back to what Councilmember Morris said. So we know now, because we're being more meticulous about this, what parts of a project are TIF eligible, and even then, we don't give money for all of those dollars, right? We're giving a percent of it, so it's a fraction of a fraction, right? And so it's pretty easy to see, and the trades, it's pretty easy to see, and if there's any question, and Mark or any other citizen, whether of this town or interested party, can file a FOIA, can say, I want to see that they're paying prevailing wage. The only way to know that for sure is you go back and you have them basically sign an affidavit with the wage sheets on it saying this is it, and that makes them liable for what they're saying. So it can be privately enforced as well as publicly enforced, if you follow me. So I think the way to do it, though, is where you've already expended the TIF dollars on what are lawfully TIF eligible pieces, and from then on, you're borrowing from the local banks, stock market, family, friends, whatever, for the rest of it. That's where we draw the line, because I don't know how you enforce that unless you go around to everybody who's working today and tomorrow and this year and say, you have to be paying prevailing wage. And what is that homeowner who wrote to Jerry going to say when his buddy, a friend, is working there on the weekend, and we come around and say, are you, we wouldn't go to that ridiculous lengths, but, where do you stop? And how do we enforce that? I don't want to be the one trying to enforce that fairly.
Thank you.
Any other comments? So, Bill, I guess you're not looking for any vote on this, but what you're looking for is perhaps some kind of consensus as to whether or not we want to continue our TIF application, if you will, as we have presently. That would include projects that are privately introduced and privately financed with a mix of prevailing wage and not.
There are two things we can do here, Mayor.
Okay.
One is, you give me direction to come back to you, forget about the next TIF project, whatever it is. Just generally, you're going to tell me that this should be the policy of the city council. The other alternative is we wait till we have a project, and then you impose what you think is the appropriate distinction between prevailing and not prevailing, or at least what you require to be prevailing and not prevailing. It's your choice. I guess the direction on that point would be useful to me. I can bring that back at the next meeting, or we can wait for one of the projects that I had referenced earlier to come forward, and you can do it at that time. That's kind of a informal way of backing into a new policy.
Everybody clearly understand that? Better than the mayor?
No, I didn't,
Okay.
I didn't quite.
Basically, what you're saying is that right now we have no policy, per se.
Yeah, we have a policy, but it doesn't require prevailing wage. on
Right,
TIF
right,
projects.
precisely.
So the policy proposition here is, well, there are a couple, right? The way I read Mr. Lewis's letter, I saw in that the suggestion that maybe the middle ground is to hold to the prevailing wage requirement for the TIF-funded pieces of a project.
It seems like the middle ground, if you will, has worked for us and continues to work for us. And it's on those real small projects, the awning projects, where our present no policy allows someone to hire someone who perhaps, because it's a small project, is not union, to come in and do the job. Is that a
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Often how it works.
Okay.
Or the small shop owner who's always used so-and-so plumbing, they're not a union plumber,
Mhm.
and when they decide they want to, make changes to their bathroom, new fixtures and so forth, they want some money to help with that. And now, if we change this, that person's going to be.
That's what I mean, yeah.
A union plumber.
May I?
Yeah, Alderman Morris.
So I think, I like that middle ground that I originally sort of proposed, but then also putting a cap or a ceiling on, we say, okay, if your project is under X number of dollars, we don't sweat it. Something like that feels. But I guess we're not hearing from a lot of council members, so it's hard to know where everyone stands.
Alderman
No,
Mcadden.
I would agree with that. If we can build in a basement where obviously the very small projects, we may not have that requirement, but a suggestion or a request. But any of the larger projects, definitely.
Alderman Felucca and then Alderman Perkins. Alderman Felucca.
All right, I think I'm more along on this with Alderman Favor, particularly in light of the appellate court's decision in 2009 that said that they were not public funds and that the public redevelopment was not subject to Prevailing Wage Act. I think I'm more along with the line of that than, us requiring prevailing wages on a private project, even if it is used with TIF dollars, because the courts have already ruled that it's not public funds.
Alderman Perkins.
So then, just to clarify, the request is really establishing some type of policy. We do have one. It's just that there is no limitation today.
Right.
It may be kind of a backwards way of looking at it, but the fact that there is no floor, no requirement, is in itself a policy.
Alderman Verbeek.
I would also agree with Alderman Favor and Felucca. That appellate court decision, the public dollar was used for prevailing wages, but the private dollar is used as the investor sees fit. I don't see how we would ever have the right to tell some type of a private investor who's using their own private money who to hire, first of all. How are we qualified to tell them who to hire? But at the same time, they're looking to make the most of that private project. Yes, there is a public component of it that's funded with public money, and that's prevailing wage labor, but the privately funded part, I don't know how we have any authority with that, or in that.
Alderman Felucca.
Mike, though, just what the courts have decided is that those are not public funds,
Right.
even though they're TIF dollars, they're not public funds. So therefore, it's not the same as the city doing a project and paying prevailing wages. This is a private development, even though it's using TIF dollars, and those are not considered public funds. Ergo, according to that court decision, they would not have to pay prevailing wages at all in any piece of the project.
I understand what you're saying, and I can see where you're coming from. I think there are a lot of citizens here who feel that it is their money, and I think we do have, as Alderman Mcadams has said, many residents in his ward and many residents that I've heard from over and over again who are not supportive of TIF in the first place. So I guess I feel like to some degree to choose to say that just for the funds that do come from the city, even though we recognize and respect that they have legally not been deemed to be public funds, the public still feels responsible, like they own those monies. And their buy-in to the decision to allow us to continue to make TIF districts is at stake there. And so, I mean, a lot of people don't like TIF districts, and so maybe that's a way to make them feel like we are respecting their investment. Just an idea.
Any other comments?
Well, may I ask what Councilmember Smith feels? Because as I read, I see the mayor hasn't weighed in, and I see 4-3 right now. I'd like to know.
Is he on?
What I was going to try to put a summation of what I think I've heard, and that is that given the fact that there's been arguments on both sides of whether or not we should consider making the prevailing wage standard, and that's the key here for tax increment financing. We are pleased that up to now, the utilization of our TIF dollars are such that there's been a very, very good mix in our community of projects that have paid prevailing wage for some of the construction items and perhaps others that were not. And especially for the smaller projects where it was difficult to find something cost-effective if they had to go out of town to get a union contractor to do something. Is that a fair summation or not? And so that what I'm saying is that we would not be in favor of the consideration of the prevailing wage standard. Alderman Verbeek.
What I am in favor of is supporting the local workforce,
Absolutely.
local laborers. So these issues aside, how do we prioritize these TIF projects for the local workforce? In other words, do we set parameters, percentages of what this project, being a local project, should require from the local labor workforce, and what does that look like? Is that DeKalb County, Kane County, Ogle County? What is that region? But I think, again, the public would prefer to have their tax dollars supporting local labor wherever possible.
And we're doing that exact same thing now on the projects that we funded with TIF dollars.
Right.
No, you're not. That's not true. I don't mean to blur it up. That's not that.
Alderman Favor.
Do we have any either anecdotal evidence that says that labor's coming in from, on the projects that have happened in the last 5 years since I've been on council? I haven't heard anything that we're importing labor to take away jobs from DeKalb residents.
I have an anecdotal story.
But
Definitely anecdotal.
But I will tell you, what I've seen is, I've seen local construction companies, local developers. I've seen, as you go by the projects, you'll see local being DeKalb County primarily on the job site. That's what anecdotally, that's what I've seen.
Sure, and this is not a TIF project, but over near me, I guess I shouldn't name names, but a complex near me was putting in a solar field, and I spoke with people there, and it sounded like there were people who were staying in hotels in order to do the work on the solar field.
So I don't necessarily, so we're getting off track,
Sure.
way off track, but on those particular items, there was a pipeline that came through DeKalb. I don't think there's a pipeline contracting service in DeKalb. You know, there was a pipeline that came through DeKalb County. All those people were from out of state. And so there's not a lot of solar installers in DeKalb. There's becoming more and more as, you know, it's becoming more economical to do that. But we're getting off track.
Well,
From
the
the
unions,
TIF projects only, we're getting way off track.
the
Thank you.
unions were specifically complaining about that specific project. So it sounded like, and, you know, I don't have all the details, but there were roles that they felt that they could play that they were unable to because of the chosen labor. And of course, that wasn't TIF, so.
Also wasn't even in the city.
True.
Alderman Verbeek.
So how can we prioritize, let's say, TIF projects, prioritizing labor from a 70-mile radius? What language can we have
I don't know.
in there that?
Hopefully, some of these bigger projects are going to draw some people in from even
Mhm.
further. You know, it's kind of hard to figure,
Okay.
but smaller projects, not so much. But just because the price would have to go up beyond what people would be willing to pay. I thought we had a middle ground. You know, there still are private means. Mark and the painters, a solid, terrific union, can still pick, you know, they have means at their disposal, lawful means to encourage people to pay prevailing wages. What can the city do here? And what was before you was the possibility of moving from what your policy has been, which is not to require any prevailing wages on the TIF projects, based on guidance from the Department of Labor, toward maybe a middle ground, which is to require prevailing wages on only those pieces of a private rehabilitation project which are funded by the TIF fund, what's called public funds, even though their origin is somebody's private property tax, right? It comes into our coffers, and then it becomes a public allocation, right? That's why, as Bill pointed out, it says they're not public funds because in the eyes of that appellate court, it's starting, what's the origin of all this? The genesis, it's, this company's taxes or that person's private property. But it becomes, some will argue it becomes closed with the public because we control it, we allocate it. You're a public body. So the middle ground is, you have a $10 million project and you're given $2 million for TIF eligible expenses. The first $2 million, and they're usually the first $2 million. They're not the last $2 million because the first $2 million are the old, getting rid of the old, preparing for the new. Everything after that is new. You can't spend TIF money on that, and we have in the past. So if we stick to the guidelines that the state statutes have made and that you've made for how we spend TIF money, there is a middle ground here. Does that make sense? Okay. I could bring that back, or we could wait until we get a project and then you can decide. You could ask me, Nicholas, how much of this is a TIF eligible number.
Yeah, Alderman Perkins.
So how does the O'Leary's project fit into this then?
It's all rehab. Actually, tax income and financing was built on the idea that it's got to be all rehab. So there's not much new. There's some new exterior, but it's all to an existing structure, right? New is when you level the site and then you remove all the debris and you put all new infrastructure in and all that. So new in the sense, but it's a continuation of the old. And now you're laying new footings, new foundations, new walls and all that, new roof, new paint inside the new space. That's not TIF eligible. It shouldn't be. It's not.
So, well, I'm confused now. So the O'Leary's project would not be TIF eligible?
It is. It's solidly because it's all rehab.
Okay.
It's the new, the brand new. So
is the new the only piece we're talking about here now then?
no. What Mark was asking for and what I said was the middle ground was you limit the prevailing wage requirement to the rehab part. That's the part that is TIF eligible. On the whole, I mean, unfortunately, there are gray areas and, soft costs, as I said earlier. In order to get a project off the ground, you got to have some architects and some engineers say it's possible, and you spend all that before you even tear down the building, so that's always thrown in. And working with other agencies, IDOT or IEPA or whatever, that's always thrown in too. But by the time you get to that second floor, it's real hard to say that this is rehab, and you're building a new building. So you can't do that. We've done it, but you can't.
Alderman Favor.
So I hear your proposal.
I'm just trying to find a middle ground here.
If we were to look for a middle ground, you threw out the number of 2 million. My other aldermen have said large projects is 2 million. The 2 million and above in TIF funds that we would want to require prevailing wage. Or do you want a different number than that? I would sit at the middle ground at $2 million. How's that?
Alderman
I
Mcadams.
don't think we're going to have any $2 million projects, though, aren't we? Aren't we talking about smaller projects going forward?
Well, you said large projects, so
Sure.
I'm trying to determine
Sure.
what in your mind is a large project?
Well, I was
because-
thinking $25,000 to $50,000. The smaller project, I've approved TIF spending on what I consider smaller projects, including the awning that we were discussing earlier.
The 50,000 is about what you budget every year for the facade program.
Yeah.
Any individual project is supposed, we're trying to get 3 or 4 a year, so,
Okay.
you're 10,000, although there's a painting project over on West State, or not, State Street in DeKalb is going on right now, the Women's Center. It's one of the few times you get painters at the front end of the project, which is great, but that's not a union project as far as I know. Maybe it is, Mark might know, but that's about 15,000. Remember, we gave that to them last year, and it had to be carried over just because of the weather was so awful in the fall. It's being done this spring. Not a big project. They came up with 3 estimates. I didn't see one union painter in them. There might be, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
Alderman Morris.
It's hard to put a number on it on the spot so fast.
Yeah.
It was like, whoa, tough question. But I think I would, fall somewhere in the middle of there and say, what about 500,000? And call that the.
But may I just suggest, rather than, I know we're trying to find, but if we try to find a number, it will be, it's just like the percent thing. We're going to be, we'll never settle. Why don't we just stick to what the law says, which is if it's TIF eligible and you vote the money for a portion of it, that portion you voted the money for is prevailing wage. Because that's where your public, whether we call them public funds or not, that's where that money's going.
Yeah, but that's not what the law is. The law is that they're not public funds, so that none of it, as it stands now, is technically prevailing wage eligible. We would have to vote that to make it so.
Correct.
And right now, the current state law is not that way.
Correct.
I think we were trying to put a number on the minimum that it had to be under to not need to have prevailing wage. That's the number I think we were trying to come up with. The people that could be, gracefully bow out of that requirement. But, okay.
Okay, I think City Manager Nicholas is looking for some direction, and I don't know if we've yet provided it.
I think it was easier to fight the COVID crisis.
Well,
Mayor,
Alderman Verbeek and then Alderman Favor.
I don't want to do battle with the appellate court ruling ever, so that's where I stand.
So you're comfortable with where we are right now? Alderman Favor?
I'm comfortable where we're at right now, and I would say, any of the aldermen can bring it up at a future TIF project meeting. We can project review, we can discuss this again.
Makes sense. Alderman Felucca, are you satisfied with where we are right now?
As I understand where we're at right now, is nothing's going to happen
Right.
right now. Is that your assumption now, Bill?
Okay.
If that's your
Yeah.
opinion, yes.
Alderman Perkins, how do you feel?
I'm comfortable with where we are.
You're comfortable with where we are now?
Yep.
Alderman Morris? Maybe?
I think we're outnumbered. It's fine.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Well, I think what I hear us doing right now is that we are very comfortable. We are comfortable with where we are right now, but I like Tony's suggestion that maybe in the future, as we get some of these larger projects, we can revisit that. Is that what you were saying, Tony? Yeah. Does that give you enough direction, City Manager Nicholas?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's move on then to number 2 under considerations. Consideration of the transfer of road jurisdiction to DeKalb Township in several locations. Nobody would like to speak to this, so City Manager Nicholas.
So there are 3 different sections of roadway about 1.59 road miles, which if you're looking for the area, about 66-foot right-of-way, 12, almost 13 acres of right-of-way. Not a large section when you look at the number of square miles that are in the city, but these are areas that join or maybe are surrounded on both sides by a township authority. And as I point out in my background, just to cut to the quick here, that there are some mutual or reciprocal advantages here if we were to cede the authority over these small sections to DeKalb Township. Craig Smith, who's the DeKalb Township Highway Commissioner, has proposed to us that we do so. There were some maps in your background, which you may have seen. There's the actual locations of these. One on West Taylor, South Malta Road, another one out on Huber Parkway, and the third, Old County Line Road, little sections. The advantage to the township is if they were ceded to the township, then they could collect, very small land area, they can collect property tax on that. The advantage to us is the township now has a responsibility to pave or to upgrade and when necessary, crack fill if it came to resurface. And we have done this before for slightly different reasons. We did some reallocation of the jurisdiction on some areas of Rich Road about a year ago and some other places for some of the same reasons, but the immediate reason it was before the council was these were a little bit beyond our normal maintenance swings, and it just seemed to be more efficient to have the township do them, so we reached amicable, very good collaboration. So this is a collaboration again. We've looked at it. If you're agreeable to this, we'll come back with an ordinance, and there'll be some language in there so that the city will never be compromised if some of the adjacent parcels, and you've seen a very detailed printout, almost all of the parcels are either not incorporated now in the city or they're public lands that aren't paying a tax or something like that. If for some reason they should be developed, such as the area off of Huber Parkway, the West Campus, 30 years from now maybe gets redeveloped at that far stretch, then we'll be protected. We'll get to re-annex, and there won't be a fight over it. So we'd like to recommend that we proceed in that fashion.
So this makes sense to me. Does it make sense to the rest of the council? Okay, Bill, so if you'd bring an ordinance back to that effect.
We will.
Consideration number 3, and I do have 2 letters, City Manager Nicholas. No, I have 1 letter and 1 person who would like to speak to the item, and that is consideration of the Municipal Code, Chapter 35, towing policy. So please allow me to read this letter from Marissa Jackson, 1888 State Street, DeKalb. To the Mayor, Council, and City Manager. My name is Marissa Jackson, and I felt it important to being the owner of Tri-State Towing, Inc. in DeKalb, that I voice my support in granting the City Council and Manager the authority to approve the city tow applications. For over 30 years, only one company has been allowed to continue profiting off of the city's tows. We have been in business for over 20 years, with most of our drivers having over 10 years' experience in the towing industry. I believe that it is truly important that the council and the manager come up with a criteria that is sufficient for the city while consulting the towing companies in the city, and make it a standard practice that if able to meet the qualifications, they should be allowed to be on the tow rotation for the city. I'd also encourage that any and all tow complaints coming from the practice of relocation be referred to as civil complaints unless a criminal act has actually occurred. When and if complaints are made on a relocation license, I believe the complaint should be made in the city building and forwarded to the city manager and attorney for review if it is deemed that a licensee is in violation of the laws set forth. The complaint should be immediately forwarded to the tow company in violation and conversation be started so both sides can explain the circumstances and work on a resolution of the issue. That was a long sentence. Never should a tow company have multiple complaints over a period of months be suddenly filed and dropped on the tow company with the threat of renewing their license if they don't comply, be it outcome. The relocation towing is a hard business, but what I would call a necessary evil. It allows property management to control who is on their property and also helps reduce crime. Just this year, we have recovered 3 stolen vehicles from relocation that might otherwise not have been recovered. Many would refer to this practice as the scarecrow technique, and I truly believe it helps with the police chief's safe streets policy. With regards to the complaints on relocation affecting the city tow application, I would say the two should be completely separated. In the counties governed by the ICC relocation practices, a complaint is filed with the ICC. At no point would it put that company in jeopardy of not towing for a local municipality. I look forward to working with the city in the future and appreciate all the time and consideration being put forth to help bring in a policy where all parties can benefit. Signed, Marissa K. Jackson, Tri-State Towing Company, President. Andrew Bjornson, if you'd like to come up and speak to this policy, please. Please go to the podium and identify yourself and make sure you use the mic there, Andrew.
Everybody hear me? Yes. Perfect. My name's Andrew Bjornson. I am co-owner of JNS Recovery and Towing out of DeKalb, and I wanted to just discuss some of concerns that I have with the policy that's in effect now.
Okay.
Okay. So some of the local or persisting problems, I've been in the business for 16 years. I've been through a lot of city council meetings in East for some of these issues. So first off, I think in the relocation industry, it is hard with the towing industry putting the two together. Some of my recommendations would be, and these are things that I have implemented, is all relocation companies in DeKalb should have cameras for all truck cameras. Cameras for all relocation and municipality tows should be mandatory, not only for the safety of the business owner, but also safety of the public. This would reduce the risk of falsified accusations against either party. These records should be kept for a minimum of 1 year. For example, we've been using live stream camera feeds for the last 6 months in my company. We check the whereabouts of where our drivers are. We would review the cameras for any customer disputes. We have a phenomenal success with this. Any kind of complaints, we can go back. It's all audio, it's all video, it's all live stream. It's for the safety if I think one of our drivers it's not only for the public, but somebody at a remote location can be watching it at all times. In our trucks, we have forward-facing, rear-facing, and driver cam-facing. Some of our reload trucks have driver and passenger facing outside also. Some of the other issues is the keeping of records. I know most municipalities in the East all require this. Electronic records of towing and relocation, including drop fees. I know that this has been brought up. I think I heard something earlier. I know that there's been an alderman that's been involved in stuff. Is not having all the records. I think even if you drop a vehicle, that should still be recorded and faxed to the police department that you had a transaction with that person, whether you did or not. If you touched the vehicle and you lifted it and you charged to release it, the city needs to be notified. You touched it, that is a partial tow. The city needs to be notified that you touched that vehicle, period. So with that, all tows and relocation of vehicles should be recorded electronically. All drop fees must be logged and reported to authorities. These records should be maintained for a minimum of 1 year. If a dispute was brought up regarding a release date or fee, it is all recorded and easily accessible. This would include at least 4 photos of the vehicle, year, make, model, VIN, time, date of location of the towed vehicle. Another concern of mine would be background checks for applicants for relocation. Every municipality in the state of Illinois requires a background check to tow for a municipality while the police are there. We're interacting with customers at a high escalated rate. I'm not sure why we don't have background checks. We're allowing anybody from a domestic battery to a felony charge, a gun charge. The ICC regulation regulates everybody to do an application process, and that's part of it, is doing a background for the last 5 years in at least 6 surrounding states: Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. Due to the requirements by the police department for police towing, all applicants, the person performing the relocation, and dispatchers should be required to complete a fingerprint and criminal background check for the previous 5 years.
Andrew, you're 4 minutes. You're well over the time. You're at 4 minutes and 9 seconds, so try to wrap it up if you can.
Okay. Any applicant who has completed a background check and receives a felony, has pending charges or arrests, must report said incident to the city of DeKalb and law enforcement immediately upon receipt of same. Applicants should also be required to complete an application for relocation permit with local law enforcement and city officials. The last page of my packet that I provided everybody includes a copy of the application that the Illinois Commerce Commissioner requires. Anyone without a relocation permit should not conduct any business involving the relocation and release of a relocated vehicle, which would include dispatchers. One more concern real quick: shared tow yards. Without governing the use of tow yards and keeping them strictly from the use of the company who applied for the tow yard permit, we will fill the town with multiple tow companies and will become a revolving door of chaos for the town. There are 3 tow companies in the city right now. One company in town is sharing a tow yard with another company with no separation within their yard. I strongly feel that this poses a safety concern for the public, and all other tow companies should have to follow the same rules. Example, applying for a special use permit for a tow yard space, background checks, applications for relocation, electronic records, and whatever steps required by the city council. I feel that setting these requirements in place set boundaries and holds the towing industry to a higher standard while facing the public. Any questions?
I think we're probably going to have a discussion of this now. Thank you, but do stick around, Andrew. I appreciate your comments. Okay, those are the 2 public participation components of this particular consideration. City Manager Nicholas.
Thank you, Mayor. Just very briefly, so I laid out a lot of background here, and there are, as Mr. Bjorns had said, 2 different types of towing. There's the private property relocation type of towing that doesn't necessarily get involved with police tows, and then there's police tows. And some companies do both, and some would choose just to do one. I have proposed, I may as well jump to the conclusion here, a small, I think relatively small, change in the ordinance, which is to bring it into consistency with other types of regulations in the municipal code that align with our chain of command, I guess you would say, that's in the heart of the municipal code, which is department heads where there is conflict or where someone has a concern about a department head's judgment, they can go to the city manager for consideration, and if that doesn't satisfy them, we can go to the council. Can always go to the council on anything. I'm not doing my job if I don't deflect some of that so that you're not having to deal with a variety of nuisances. And by the same token, the department head's not doing their job if I'm dealing with a lot of those same things. I have to say, our police chief has done a very good job overall. I'm not looking to jump into the towing business, or into the regulation of towing, but I do feel it's probably good to tweak Chapter 35 so there's an appeal process and any of these steps where there can be an impact on the business, suspension of a license or denial of a renewal or something like that, which is going to tangibly affect the business. And I think I should be involved in that, and then I think you should also be involved. If my judgment falters, you should be able to weigh in, and people should be able to come here. That's the general premise that I set out, but as Mr. Bjornson said, and I hadn't thought about this, but I just learned in recent days about the fact that one of the towing companies has invited another tower in to use their yard. And we go to a lot of lengths to go through a special use process and so forth with a particular applicant. It isn't like a omnibus type thing where you and everybody that you know can come in. It's just one company. So I think maybe as I come back, based on your direction tonight with a few changes, I might consider that change as well, just to make it ironclad that if you're in business and you want to do this, get your own yard. And then we know where, like a cattle drive, how do you know if they're not branded? How do you know who's got a legal tow and not a legal tow? So.
Thank you. Any comments or questions of City Manager Nicholas? Alderman Verbeek.
Thank you, Bill. You addressed this well, and I would agree that yards should not be shared. So I would look forward to you coming back with this for us, which includes all of this language, which sounds great, in addition to your cleanup that you mentioned.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Alderman Favor.
Just a quick question. In terms of the, I guess, how much time, either on a weekly or monthly basis, does the chief of police
I'll let the chief answer that. That's a good
Over
question.
the course of the last year, it's been quite a bit. Time-wise, I'm sure it's a month, maybe a few hours, handful of hours.
Okay.
For the benefit of those listening at home and for the benefit of Alderman Smith and City Clerk Fazekas, who cannot hear you, John, you might want to come to the podium unless you have or share that microphone with our city attorney.
I would say over the course of a month, we, depending on violations that had been reported by the public, which at some points is more than others. It could be anywhere from a couple hours of my time. Commander Woodruff spends a great deal of time with the application process and approval, but it could be a handful of hours, 5-10 hours a month if it's a busy month. Sometimes there's a month that there's not much time dedicated to it.
And my point was, is that the best use of our chief's time? And is there an alternative? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just asking if that's the best use of your time.
Well, I would say due process is always, we always consider due process when we're faced with a violation. So our concern is not only investigating a complaint, but to make sure that there's due process that goes along with that complaint. So I think it's incumbent on me to make sure that the process is followed. And, beyond me, I agree, if there's no satisfaction between two parties, there should be a third party to go and talk to see if they can rectify a situation. But at times, we don't spend much time on it, but in other times, a great deal.
Okay. Thank you.
Can Alderman Faber clarify the question?
Yes, Alderman Morris.
What was your question? How much time do you spend? But I feel like I missed part of the question.
So the dispute resolution is, the first line for the dispute resolution is the chief of police. And that's why I'm trying to figure out, should it be the chief of police, or should it be a delegate of the chief of police? Because his time is extremely valuable to the city of DeKalb.
So your question was, how much time does he spend on dispute resolution for this? Okay,
For this, yep.
sorry.
And, because, you know, I'm sure you received an email proposal, just like I did, you know, that we would just hand this off to the court system. And it would go to, so I'm just trying to find out, you know, if you're spending a couple hours a month, that's probably not a big deal. You're seeing that the process is working, that there's no tweaks that we need to make, and everything is good. If you're spending 5 hours a week, or, you know, there's something broken and it's not getting fixed, then there's a better use of your time. I don't want you to, it's gonna, I won't use that analogy, but yeah. I was gonna say, you know, I don't want you to sit and play traffic cop, but there's much more important things that I would rather have you doing. And again, if it could be delegated to someone else, you delegate that authority to them to do that if it's becoming burdensome. Thank you.
Yeah, well, to me, the terminology chief of police means that somebody, either the chief or one of his designees, may be working on that. What I think the point of your question might be, or if I were saying it, trying to put words in your mouth, Alderman Favor, it would be, how much time do we spend in the police department on towing matters? From what I hear, we spend 10, 15 hours easily during the course of a month between between Commander Leverton, is that right? Is that who handles this? Woodruff, okay, Craig Woodruff. I didn't want to give you another responsibility, Jason. I mean, that's quite a bit of time, but maybe in the overall scope of things, that's what police departments in all municipalities the size of DeKalb, Illinois spend. I don't know.
Well, I was just going to say that there's a phrase, this was done about 5 years ago, that the chief, in his or her sole and absolute discretion, so it really defines the chief as one, and then it doesn't go up to me, it can go to the council, but I'm not involved in it. And so that's an area where we've had a lot of debate in the last 6-7 months, and I think we can fix that piece. Plus what Alderman Verbeek mentioned too, which is a more recent thing on the scene here.
Does that seem to make sense with folks here, that the recommendation that we have sort of a 3-level enforcement / mediation process, the police department, the city manager, and ultimately the city council? I see a lot of heads shaking affirmatively. So, Bill, does that require a change in our municipal code?
I'll bring something back.
Okay, very good. Any further discussion on this? All right, let's move along then. Resolutions. J1, Resolution 2020-037, approving an auditorium liquor license for Preservation of Egyptian Theater, PET, Incorporated, doing business as the Egyptian Theater, 138 North 2nd Street. I'd entertain a motion to approve this, please.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Felucca, seconded by Alderman Mcadams. I think we have discussed this somewhat at our last meeting and wanted it brought back. Bill, do you have anything further on this?
The resolution before you tonight aligns with the ordinance that you approved last, or the consideration you approved last
Okay.
night.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Schmitt,
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
Mcadams,
Yes.
Verbeek,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Felucca,
Yes.
Mayor Smith,
Yes.
8 ayes.
That resolution is approved as presented. Number 2, Resolution 2020-038, authorizing an agreement for construction phase engineering services with Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley for the relocation and replacement of the existing Naval units on runway ends 2, 20, and 27. This would be Illinois Project DKB 4556. I'd entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Favor, seconded by Alderman Mcadams. City Manager Nicholas.
We're
please.
replacing Vazzies with Pappies, and this is the third and last phase of this process, and it's the least in terms of actual cost, although a considerable payment will go to our consulting engineer who has to, under the federal guidelines, provide project supervision for the upgrade, and we urge your approval.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve this resolution. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Perkins,
Yes.
Mcadden,
Yes.
Verbic,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Felucca,
Yes.
Schmitt,
Yes.
Mayor Schmitt.
Yes.
8 ayes.
Thank you. That resolution is approved as presented. We now move to the ordinances section of our city council meeting. We have no ordinances for second reading tonight. We have one for first reading, Ordinance 2020-031, authorizing an effective electrical utility tax rate for electricity used or consumed by Ventus Tech Services, LLC. That's Project Ventus. I'd entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Felucca, seconded by Alderman Mcadams. City Manager Nicholas, please.
Thank you, Mayor. At the last regular meeting, as you recall, you unanimously approved an annexation and development ordinance that actually required the approval of this ordinance, which is before you tonight, so long as it conformed to the language that was in the annexation and development ordinance. It does. We recommend your approval. The recommendation is also that we proceed on both readings tonight. This is the last piece of the entitlement process.
Well, the last piece on a marvelous project. Wow. Any further discussion on this? Roll call, please.
Mcadden,
Yes.
sorry,
Yes.
thank you. Verbic,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Felucca,
Yes.
Schmitt,
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
Mayor Schmitt.
Yes.
8 ayes.
I'd like to move that the approved on second reading.
We waive second reading?
Yeah, waive second reading and approve. Thank you.
Okay.
Forgot my own language.
Do I have a second to that?
Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Felucca, seconded by Alderman Mcadams, that we waive second reading and approve this ordinance. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Verbic,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Felucca,
Yes.
Schmitt,
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
Mcadden,
Yes.
Mayor Schmitt.
Yes.
8 ayes.
That ordinance is approved as presented. We now move along to reports and communications, allowing each of our council members to report or communicate anything they'd like. We'll begin with Alderman Carolyn Morris.
I wanted to ask Alderman Felucca if it's okay if I take off my mask. Is that all right? Okay. All right. I have had extensive communication from a number of residents in the past week regarding problems with apartments, problems with eviction type experiences. So I wanted to share with you guys an open letter that I'd like to share both to owners and to renters. Okay. Dear owner or property manager, I understand that times are hard for all of us. I have owned rental properties since 2008, and they have always been mortgaged. I know what it's like when a tenant pays late and when you can't make your mortgage payment, or you have to figure out how to swallow that cost, where to squeeze that money from. It's stressful. I can only imagine how that is exacerbated if that is your primary income source. COVID-19 has presented a unique challenge to us all. Those of us who rent are likely experiencing the hardest hits: job loss, food insecurity, and the risk of being evicted. These anxieties only compound the situation and make it more difficult for us to stay on track during these pensive times. If we begin to have our jobless 14.7% become homeless as well, we're going to have many more problems follow. Will we let them sleep in the streets? Will you be able to rent that apartment to someone else? Or will we donate more money to Hope Haven to shelter people? 14.7% of our city's roughly 40,000 population is 5,880 people. Hope Haven does not have that level of capacity, and we're not going to see that many more people wanting to rent the space you may have chosen to evict others from. Sure, our community may be able to absorb a small number of evictions. People may be able to consolidate their lives with someone else's, but does that add value for the owner who had to evict them? Sorry, my computer is it's broken. Give me 1 second, I apologize. My clicker broke. We need to work together to see how we can do this in the most beneficial way for all parties involved. We may need to renegotiate rent prices to make them more affordable. Receiving some rent is always better than none. We do not know if eviction bans can be enforced, and they may be lifted as of June 1st. One person I spoke with today was talking about their property being at about 40% expected eviction come June 1st. Mm-hmm. We don't know if... I'm asking owners if you would just try to be understanding. Ask tenants to try to make the rent and work with them if they cannot. I'm asking you, property owner, not to evict your tenants, not for the next 6 months. I'm asking this as a favor. This may be economically impossible, and for that I forgive you in advance, but I'm asking you to do everything in your power to give as much as you can. Imagine the legacy we could have as a community if we could say, during COVID-19, not a single person was evicted in our community. We figured it out, we supported each other, and we are proudly DeKalb. Now, to my renters, I have to say, dear renter, I know that these are difficult times, and I can only imagine that getting eviction notice right now really makes it a lot harder. I'm guessing if you can't pay your rent, there are other necessities you've already foregone. Here are my tips to you. Talk to your property manager. Explain the situation as soon as you know you may not be able to pay rent. Keeping this line of communication open builds trust and goodwill. Next, tap every resource you can, because property owners may have mortgages to pay. If they have a mortgage to pay and their property is foreclosed on, it's going to hurt many people. Your landlord will likely do all they can to renegotiate the mortgage, get payments deferred, etc., but it may get really bad for them too. Make sure you are using everything you can to cut costs so that you can pay rent. Use the free school lunches for kids. Use the mobile food pantry. Call 211 if you don't know where to get what you need. The DeKalb Township has grocery assistance funds. Family Service Agency has many resources that can help. The DeKalb County Public Health Department's website has a long list of these resources. that includes everything in the area. Don't weather this storm alone. There are many people in our community whose job is just to help. Last, downsizing your life might be needed, or you may need to move in with a friend temporarily. Just keep communication open with your landlord. In the end, it will help us all to succeed as much as we can through this crazy new world. As your first ward alderman, I wish that the city could offer you a hand up to assist. We're just not in that position right now. And so I just want to ask you both, renters and tenants and owners, if you would please try to work together for the best of our community. That's all.
Collaboration and communication. We've talked about that several times. Alderman Felucca.
I have a couple items too. I'd like to say, we're at the end of Nurses Week, and I want to recognize and thank them for all they do, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd also like to encourage continued support of locally owned businesses and restaurants. And as you are able, please support the local food pantries with non-perishable food donations. And if you are able, please, and have the opportunity to do so, please volunteer at one of them.
Thank you, Alderman Felucca. Alderman Schmitt, 3rd Ward. Alderman Schmitt, 3rd Ward. We must have lost Alderman Schmitt. Alderman Perkins, 4th Ward.
No report.
Alderman Mcadams, 5th Ward.
No report.
Alderman Verbeek, 6th Ward.
I'd like to warmly welcome Cast Iron Coffee to Ward 6 and congratulate the 2020 DeKalb High School Barbs for graduation coming up, and along with our NIU Huskies that are graduating. Congratulations to all the graduates.
Thank you, Alderman Verbeek. 7th Ward, Alderman Favor.
No report.
As I mentioned earlier on, I had a couple of paragraphs that I would like to read to you from the last column there in the paper, and I think they're germane. I said another question on everyone's mind, just when can we expect a further opening of our state, our region, and our county? Sycamore Mayor Kurt Lang and I have exchanged conversations with each other and with the Illinois Municipal League about this very subject. Kurt and I reviewed what the mayor of East Peoria decided to do recently in opening facets of his community in opposition to Governor Pritzker's mandate. Both Mayor Lang and I have felt it best to align ourselves at this time with the governor, even though we both may not always agree. Kudos to Representative Jeff Kiker, who has made himself widely available since the COVID outbreak. He's not been hesitant to appear on the county's weekly conference call or on several DeKalb County Unites webinars. Jeff has had views that have occasionally differed with our governors, but that's what our legislative process is all about. Personally, I hope that we can shortly see a return to Springfield by our lawmakers so that they can become more involved in the decision-making surrounding the reopening of Illinois. I have nothing else to report. City Clerk Fazekas, anything to report? City Clerk Fazekas, anything to report? City Manager Nicholas, anything to report?
I do not.
Okay, that concludes this session of the regular meeting. We now are informed that we do have an executive session to approval of the executive session, to hold an executive session in order to discuss personnel as provided for in 5 ILCS 120/2C1. I'd entertain a motion to recess into executive session.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Perkins, seconded by Alderman Verbeek. Any discussion? Alderman Smith, are you there? He is not back
Jeff
on,
just
okay?
came- No, I think we had a technical difficulty.
A technical difficulty? Okay, well, we have enough aldermen, fortunately, tonight, everyone except Alderman Smith, that we can vote on this. Roll call, please. And is our clerk on the line?
They're both dropped.
She is not. Can we have someone call the roll?
Assistant City Manager will.
City Manager Munch?
Oh, here comes.
Oh, here comes Ruth right now. Ruth, I need you to, in the absence of City Clerk Fazekas, our Executive Assistant, the very talented and able Ruth Scott, would you call the roll, please? What we're voting on is to recess into executive session.
Morris,
Yes.
Felucca,
Yes.
Schmitt, Perkins,
Yes.
Mcadams,
Yes.
Verbeek,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Mayor Smith,
Yes.
7 yes.
We are now in recess for executive session. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.